Welcome back to the briefing room. I'm Harper Vance, and here we honor the warriors who fight their hardest battles long after the uniform comes off. Today, we are deploying with U.S. Army Staff Sergeant Maisie Barnes, a decorated combat veteran whose tactical instincts are sharper than a razor wire. When a hired stalker corners her little girl in a crowded mall restroom, he thinks he's found an easy target. Instead, he wakes a sleeping giant. But the enemy isn't just the man in the stall. It's the wealthy, powerful dynasty that signed his paycheck. This isn't just a story about custody. It's a masterclass in tactical warfare against the people who should have been family. Check your six and stay focused. The operation begins now. It was 1 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon at the Polaris Fashion Place. The air smelled of Auntie Anne's pretzels, that thick, sugary scent of butter and cinnamon that screams American suburbia. I was watching Abby twirl in her new blue dress outside of Macy's. She looked like a little bellflower spinning in the wind. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, the world felt perfect. The jazz music from the overhead speakers washed over us, a luxury for a staff sergeant on leave like me. I wasn't thinking about deployment schedules or field drills. I was just Maisie. I was just a mom. Then, Abby tugged on my hand. "Mommy, potty," she whispered. We ducked into the women's restroom on the second floor. It was relatively empty, the tiles gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. I ushered Abby into the middle stall and locked it. I stood by the door, holding her little purse, staring absent-mindedly at the gap beneath the partition. That was when the world tilted on its axis. The main door to the restroom opened and closed with a heavy hydraulic hiss. Then, silence. No sound of high heels clicking. No chatter of teenagers, just a slow, deliberate shuffle. Abby froze mid-motion. Her small hand gripped my wrist, her fingernails digging into my skin. "Mommy, shh," she breathed, her eyes widening in pure, primal terror. I looked down. Through the 12-inch gap between the floor and the stall door, I saw them. A pair of men's dress shoes. Expensive leather, polished to a mirror shine, size 12 at least. They weren't moving towards the urinals because there weren't any. They were moving slowly past the stalls. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. My maternal instinct, the part of me that wanted to scream and cover my child, died instantly. In its place, the staff sergeant woke up. My heart rate didn't spike. It plummeted. It slowed to a cold, rhythmic thud. 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 This is combat breathing. This is survival. I pushed Abby gently behind me, my right hand instinctively drifting to my hip for a sidearm that wasn't there. I grabbed nothing but air and denim. The shoes stopped right in front of our stall. The shadow stretched long and dark across the tile floor. The smell of danger was thicker than the scent of industrial antiseptic. A voice, low and smooth, drifted over the top of the door. "Abby, I have some candy for you." He didn't say, "little girl." He said, "Abby." Adrenaline flooded my system, but I channeled it into ice. This wasn't a random pervert. This was a targeted acquisition. Someone had sold us out. I didn't scream. Screaming is for victims. I pulled my phone from my back pocket, thumbing it into video mode with practiced ease. I dropped to one knee, silent as a ghost, and angled the lens through the gap in the door hinge. On my screen, the man was clear. Charcoal gray suit, expensive watch. He was tapping on the door, holding a lollipop wrapper, the crinkle sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Abby, don't be shy." I recorded his face as it reflected in the full-length mirror on the opposite wall. Target acquired, intelligence gathered. Now, extraction. I turned to Abby. Tears were streaming down her face, but she made no sound. I raised my hand, thumb to lips. Silence. 2 fingers pointing to the door. "Move." These were the games we played at home, the secret soldier signals I taught her for fun. Now they were the only things keeping her safe. She nodded, trembling. I waited. The man shifted his weight, turning slightly toward the sinks, perhaps checking his own reflection or looking for an exit route. Now. I kicked the wall of the adjacent stall. Hard. Bang! The man spun around toward the noise. In that split second of distraction, I didn't open the door. I grabbed Abby, hoisted her onto my hip, and slammed the lock back. We burst out of the stall not running, but moving with aggressive speed. I didn't look at him. I didn't engage. I shoulder-checked the main door open, and we were out. We merged into the Sunday crowd. I didn't stop until we reached the central security office near the food court. The head of security was a large man with a mustard stain on his shirt, looking bored. He started to wave me off before I even reached the desk. "Ma'am, lost and found is..." I slammed my military ID onto the counter. The plastic cracked against the laminate. "I am Staff Sergeant Barnes, United States Army," I said, my voice low but cutting through the noise of the mall. "There is an adult male actively stalking a minor in the second-floor women's restroom. I have video evidence. You will lock down the exits and pull the camera feeds immediately, or I will call 911 and report you as an accessory to attempted kidnapping." The man's eyes went wide. He saw the look in my eyes, the look that says I have seen things that would give him nightmares. He grabbed his radio. 3 minutes later, they brought him in. His name was Hartman. He wasn't struggling. He wasn't panicked. As 2 police officers led him into the holding room, he was calmly adjusting his silk tie. He looked like a banker who had taken a wrong turn, not a predator. When the officer clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists, Hartman looked up. He didn't look at the cops. He looked straight at me. And then, he smiled. It was a cold, condescending smirk that made my stomach turn. "I have rights," Hartman said to the officer, his voice smooth, dripping with entitlement. "I am a private investigator, conducting surveillance." He turned his body toward me, looking me up and down with open disgust. His eyes lingered on my short, practical haircut, my calloused hands, my boots. "And she," he pointed a manicured finger at me, "is not a victim. Look at her. That is a wild animal in a uniform." The room went silent. Abby buried her face in my leg. "You people think she's a hero?" Hartman laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "She is a brute. She doesn't know how to be a mother. A woman like that, she destroys soft things. I wasn't hurting the child. I was doing that little girl a favor." The insult hit me harder than a physical blow. He wasn't just attacking my safety. He was attacking my soul. He was echoing words I had heard before. Words that belonged to a world of country clubs and pearl necklaces. A wild animal. I stared at him, my hand resting on Abby's head. I didn't lunge at him. I didn't yell. But inside, the last remnant of peace shattered. This man wasn't the enemy. He was just a weapon. And I knew exactly who had pulled the trigger. Justice in America has a price tag. And apparently, I couldn't afford it. 30 minutes after the police had cuffed Hartman, a lawyer in a $3,000 suit swept into the precinct like a toxic wind. He didn't look at me. He walked straight to the desk sergeant, whispered a few words, and handed over a business card that probably cost more than my monthly base pay. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The officers, who had been sympathetic to a fellow service member just moments ago, suddenly wouldn't meet my eyes. Hartman was released. As he walked past the bench where Abby and I were sitting, he stopped. He adjusted his cufflinks, the picture of arrogance. "My client is very concerned about her granddaughter's safety," Hartman said, his voice low enough that the desk sergeant couldn't hear, but loud enough to cut me open. "She thinks the military environment is too rough for a little girl." I squeezed my hands into fists so tight my nails cut into my palms. Too rough. There was only one person in the world who used that phrase to describe my life. Margaret Louise Miller. My mother-in-law. The matriarch of Upper Arlington, who lived in a mansion that smelled of lavender and old money. A woman who had never known the smell of gunpowder or fear. Hartman walked out the door. A free man. I was left sitting under the buzzing fluorescent lights, feeling the weight of the glass wall that separates the people who serve this country from the people who own it. Then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up with a name. Mike Miller. My late husband's younger brother. I stared at it for a second before answering. Mike? Maisie. His voice came through the speaker, breathless, frantic, and layered with a panic that felt rehearsed. Oh my God, are you okay? I heard there was an incident at Polaris. Is Abby hurt? I'm already in the car. I'm coming to get you guys right now. I froze. A cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning settled in my spine. Mike, I said slowly, my voice steady. How did you know? What? I haven't called anyone. The police haven't released a statement. We've been here for 40 minutes. How do you know I was at Polaris? How do you know there was an incident? There was a pause on the other end, a silence that was heavy with guilt. Just a feeling, Maisie, you know? Call it intuition. I just had a bad feeling. I'm 10 minutes away. He hung up before I could ask another question. Intuition. Right. I lowered the phone and suddenly I wasn't in a police station anymore. I was back at the Miller estate last November for Thanksgiving. The memory hit me like a physical blow. The dining room table was long, polished mahogany, set with silver that gleamed under the crystal chandelier. I had just come from a double shift at the base and hadn't had time to change. I was still in my fatigues, smelling of diesel and exhaustion. Margaret sat at the head of the table, looking at my uniform like it was a stain on her perfect tablecloth. She took a sip of her wine and set the glass down with a sharp clink. God created women to keep the fire in the hearth, Maisie, she announced to the room, her voice soft but venomous. Not to carry rifles in the mud. David's death, it was the price we all paid for your arrogance. You chose a career over your husband. You weren't there to be a wife, so he volunteered for that extra tour. He died because his home was empty. The room had gone silent. My fork hovered over my plate. The cruelty of it took my breath away. I looked at Mike, sitting across from me, hoping for a defense, hoping that David's brother would say something, anything. But Mike just looked down at his butternut squash soup. He stirred it slowly, a coward in a cashmere sweater, too afraid of his mother's purse strings to defend his brother's widow. That environment is too rough for Abby, Margaret had said then, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin. She needs culture. She needs stability. Not this. Back in the present, the precinct noises rushed back in. The ringing phones, the clacking keyboards. It wasn't a coincidence. The lawyer, Hartman's words, Mike's impossible knowledge, it was all connected. This wasn't a random attack. It was a coordinated strike. And the enemy was family. I looked down at Abby. She was curled up on the hard plastic bench, clutching her teddy bear, her eyes wide and wet. Mommy, she whispered. Yeah, baby, I'm here. That mean man. She hesitated, her small brow furrowing. The one in the bathroom. What about him? He smelled funny, she said quietly. He smelled like Uncle Mike's car. My heart stopped. What do you mean, honey? You know, she wrinkled her nose. Like mint candy and that smoky smell, peppermint and cigarettes. The world sharpened into devastating clarity. Menthol cigarettes and peppermint air freshener. That was the specific, nauseating scent of Mike's sedan. Hartman hadn't just been tracking us, he had been in Mike's car. Or Mike had met with him. The betrayal tasted like ash in my mouth. Mike, the fun uncle. Mike, who bought Abby ice cream and played catch with her in the yard. He wasn't just a coward who stared at his soup, he was an accomplice. I stood up, slinging my bag over my shoulder. The staff sergeant was back in full control. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, tactical fury. My brother-in-law was coming to pick us up, thinking he was the hero of this story. He thought he was rescuing a helpless widow and her traumatized daughter. He had no idea he was walking into an ambush. Come on, Abby, I said, my voice calm and dangerous. Uncle Mike is here. We walked out into the cool Ohio afternoon to wait for him. I wasn't waiting for a ride home. I was waiting for a target. I have to pause here for a second because, honestly, my blood is boiling. We all know that feeling, right? When the people who are supposed to have your back are the ones holding the knife. It's a special kind of heartbreak when family betrays you for money or approval. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, or if you're just rooting for Maisie to take them down, do me a favor. Drop a fire emoji or type "fight" in the comments right now. Let's show Maisie she's not fighting this battle alone. Mike Miller burst into the precinct lobby like he was auditioning for a soap opera. He was sweating, his hair disheveled, his eyes darting around the room until they landed on us. "Maisie, Abby," he shouted, rushing over. "Thank God you guys are safe." He reached out to hug Abby, his arms wide, the picture of the concerned uncle. But I stepped in between them. I placed a hand on his chest, not a push, but a barrier. A checkpoint. "We're fine, Mike," I said, my voice flat. He stopped, confused by the coldness of my touch. I was so worried. When I got that feeling, I looked straight into his eyes. In interrogation training, they teach you to look for the tells, the micro-expressions that betray a liar before his mouth even opens. Mike's pupils were dilated, swallowing the blue of his irises. His hands were trembling slightly at his sides, and he couldn't hold my gaze. He looked at my chin, my shoulder, anywhere but my eyes. "Why did you get here so fast, Mike?" I asked. "You live 20 minutes away. You got here in 8. I was already driving," he stammered, a crooked, nervous smile plastering itself onto his face. "Just luck, I guess. Luck or coordination." "Let's go," I said. "Take us to my car." The ride to my house was suffocating. Mike tried to fill the silence with chatter about the weather, about the Buckeyes game, about anything other than the elephant sitting in the passenger seat. I didn't answer. I just watched him. That was when I saw it. Mike was wearing his expensive tan trench coat. Sticking out of the inner breast pocket, just barely visible, was the corner of a yellow piece of paper. It was crumpled, as if shoved in hastily. When we pulled into my driveway, Mike put the car in park. "I'll get the gate for you, Maisie," he said, eager to be helpful, eager to please. As soon as he stepped out of the car and turned his back to unlatch the gate, I moved. I didn't hesitate. I reached over to the driver's seat, my fingers acting with the precision of a surgeon, and plucked the yellow paper from his coat pocket. I slid it into my palm and brought it back to my lap before he even turned around. I unfolded it in the shadow of my purse. It wasn't a grocery receipt. It was a carbon copy of a bank transfer slip. Beneficiary: Hartman Investigations, LLC. Amount: $5,000. Memo: Polaris Op. Advance payment. The world didn't spin. It stopped. $5,000. My brother-in-law, the man who ate at my table, the man my daughter adored, had paid $5,000 to have a stranger stalk us in a public restroom. He had funded the terror in my child's eyes. I shoved the slip into my pocket as Mike got back in the car, smiling that same vacuous, treacherous smile. "All set," he chirped. We walked into the house. It should have felt like a sanctuary. But now, the air felt stale, contaminated. "I'm going to order some pizza," Mike announced, heading for the kitchen. "Pepperoni, Abby's favorite, my treat." While he was on the phone, a memory flashed in my mind. Last week, Mike had been insistent, almost annoying, about getting a spare key to my house. "I can come water your plants when you pull those night shifts at the base, Maisie. You don't want them to die, do you?" I had given him the key. I had thanked him. I felt a wave of nausea, followed instantly by rage. OPSEC violation. The perimeter had been breached. I left Abby in her room with her headphones on and moved silently into the living room. I scanned the space, looking not as a homeowner, but as a soldier clearing a room. Where would I put a bug if I wanted to hear everything? Central location, hidden but with clear audio lines. My eyes landed on the mantelpiece, the wedding photo of David and me. It was the focal point of the room. I walked over to it. I tilted the frame forward. Nothing. I looked down at the table it sat on. I ran my hand underneath the wood. My fingers brushed against something cold and plastic. I pulled it off. It was a small black box, no bigger than a matchbook. A tiny red light blinked rhythmically on its side. Blink, blink, blink. A listening device. High-end. Mike hadn't come to water the plants. He had come to turn my home, the only safe place my daughter and I had left, into a surveillance trap. He was recording my grief, my parenting, my private conversations, feeding them all back to his mother like a loyal dog retrieving a dead bird. "Pizza's on the way," Mike called out, walking into the living room. He was beaming, rubbing his hands together. 30 minutes or it's free, right? He stopped when he saw me. I was standing in the middle of the room. In my left hand, I held the bank transfer slip. In my right hand, held up to the light like a poisonous insect, was the black listening device. The red light blinked at him, an accusing eye. Mike's smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I looked at him with the cold, hard stare of a commanding officer looking at a traitor. "You didn't water the plants, Mike," I said. My voice was barely a whisper, but in the silent house, it sounded like a gavel striking a block. The good uncle mask shattered on the floor. Tonight, there would be no pizza. There would be no family games. Tonight, the traitor would answer for his crimes. Before I confronted Mike in my living room, before I held that blinking bug in my hand, I had seen the face of the devil. It happened back at the precinct, just 10 minutes before Mike arrived to pick us up. The officer who arrested Hartman had called me into a side room. "Sergeant Barnes," he said, his voice heavy, "we found this in Hartman's briefcase. You need to see it." He placed a thick blue file folder on the metal table. The label on the front was typed in crisp, sterile font. Target Reconstruction Project. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first page wasn't a surveillance photo. It was a grainy, black-and-white image printed from a hospital security camera dated 8 years ago. It was me, holding a newborn Abby in the maternity ward. Beneath the photo, in elegant, cursive handwriting that I recognized instantly, were 2 sentences that stopped my heart. "The mistake began here. Correction needed." Margaret Miller didn't see the birth of her granddaughter as a miracle. She saw it as an error, an administrative glitch in the Miller bloodline that required fixing. I turned the page, and the nausea hit me in waves. The file was filled with hundreds of photos taken over the last 6 months. It was a catalog of my life, stripped of context and twisted into a narrative of failure. There was a photo of me from 3 weeks ago. I was asleep on the sofa, still wearing my muddy fatigues, my boots unlaced on the floor. I had just come back from a 48-hour field training exercise in the rain. Beside me, Abby was building a Lego castle on the rug, content and safe. But the typed note under the photo read, "Subject exhibits chronic exhaustion, unable to interact with the child, neglectful environment." They took my exhaustion, the exhaustion of serving my country to provide for my daughter, and called it neglect. I flipped to another page, a photo taken through the window of a McDonald's drive-thru on a Friday night. I was handing Abby a Happy Meal box. I remembered that night. We had laughed all the way home, singing along to the radio, eating fries in the car because I was too tired to cook but wanted to see her smile. The note read, "Poor nutrition. Reliance on junk food. Subject lacks domestic discipline. Every sacrifice I made, every drop of sweat, every moment I pushed myself to be both father and mother, was being weaponized against me." They were building a case to prove I was unfit simply because I wasn't perfect, simply because I wasn't rich. But the true horror was at the back of the file. It was an application form for St. Michael's Military Academy in Virginia. It was filled out in Abby's name. The tuition was $50,000 a year. It was a boarding school, 800 miles away from Ohio. Clipped to the application was a letter from Margaret to the headmaster. I read it, and I felt like I was reading my own obituary. "My granddaughter has been infected by the low-class habits and crudeness of her mother. She's undisciplined and rough. I require a strict environment to purge these influences and mold her into a true Miller lady. Cost is no object." Purge. She used the word purge like Abby was a disease that needed to be cured. She didn't want to raise Abby. She wanted to erase me from Abby's soul. She wanted to ship my 8-year-old daughter off to a stranger in Virginia to be scrubbed clean of her mother's love. The final page was a financial analysis, It was a cold, mathematical spreadsheet comparing my E6 staff sergeant salary to the Miller Family Trust Fund. My income was highlighted in yellow. The trust fund was highlighted in green. The conclusion at the bottom was circled in red ink. Subject is financially incompetent to provide a standard lifestyle. Use economic leverage to force surrender of custody. She thought my love was a commodity. She thought she could buy my daughter like she bought a new car or a piece of jewelry. She reduced the bond between a mother and child to a balance sheet. I closed the file. The blue cardboard felt cold under my fingers. This wasn't just a grandmother concerned about her granddaughter. This was a hostile takeover. This was an execution order for my family. I looked up at the officer, my eyes dry but burning. "Can I take a picture of this?" "It's evidence, Sergeant," he said softly. "But take what you need." I took photos of every page with my phone. I needed ammunition. When I walked out of that room to meet Mike, I wasn't just angry. I was terrified. Not of Hartman, not of the stalking, but of the sheer, calculated malice of a woman who would destroy a child's happiness to satisfy her own ego. Margaret Miller didn't want Abby. She wanted a trophy. And she was willing to kill my spirit to get it. That blue file was the declaration of war. And as I walked out to the lobby where Mike was waiting with his fake smile and his treacherous heart, I knew one thing for certain. I would burn their world to the ground before I let them take her. I didn't hand the evidence to Mike. I weaponized it. I threw the black listening bug and the crumpled yellow bank slip onto the coffee table. They landed next to the pepperoni pizza box with a sharp plastic clatter that sounded like a gavel striking a death sentence. Mike flinched so hard he nearly knocked over a lamp. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a trench coat. "Maisie, I can explain," he stammered, his hands fluttering uselessly in the air. I raised my hand. Palm out, fingers together. Halt. "You don't get to explain," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It was terrifyingly quiet. It was the voice I used when briefing soldiers before a dangerous mission. "You get to confess. Sit. Down." I pointed to the armchair opposite the sofa. Mike didn't argue. He collapsed into the chair, shrinking into himself, his shoulders hunched. He looked like a child who had been caught stealing from the collection plate. I stood over him. In interrogation, physical dominance is key. I blocked his view of the door. I blocked his view of the rest of the house. I was the only thing in his world. "Why?" I asked. Just one word. But I filled it with enough contempt to drown him. Mike stared at his knees. Tears started to leak from his eyes. Hot, pathetic tears of weakness, not remorse. Mom said you were unstable," he whispered, his voice shaking. "She said your job is too dangerous. She said if you get deployed again, or if you die in combat, Abby would be an orphan. She said she just wanted what was best for the girl. She wants to protect her." I laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound that had no humor in it. Best for her. I stepped closer. Is hiring a stranger to stalk an 8-year-old girl in a bathroom best for her? Is recording her mother in her own living room best for her? Or is shipping her off to a military boarding school in Virginia to be purged of my influence best for her? Mike's head snapped up. "What?" "No. Mom said Abby would live at the estate, with family." "You're either stupid or you're evil, Mike." I spat the words at him. "Which is it?" "I did it for David," Mike blurted out, desperation creeping into his voice. "He would want me to protect this family. He would want Abby to be safe." That broke me. I moved faster than he could react. I grabbed the framed photo of David from the mantelpiece. David in his captain's dress blues, smiling that confident, kind smile. I marched back to Mike and shoved the frame into his face, inches from his nose. "Don't you dare," I hissed, my voice trembling with rage. "Don't you dare speak his name with your dirty mouth." Mike recoiled, pressing himself back into the upholstery. "David died protecting freedom," I said, each word a hammer blow. "He died so people could live without fear. And you? You used that freedom to become a spy for your mother. You violated his home. You terrorized his daughter. You think David would be proud? If he were alive right now, he wouldn't be thanking you. He would be throwing you through that front window himself. Mike broke. He buried his face in his hands and began to sob. Ugly, heaving sobs that shook his entire body. The facade of the dutiful brother, the caring uncle, was gone. All that was left was a pathetic, broken man. Tell me the truth, Mike, I demanded, lowering the photo but keeping my eyes locked on him. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about love. Margaret doesn't do anything for love. What did she promise you? He looked up, his face red and blotchy, snot running from his nose. Money, he choked out. She promised me the trusteeship. I stared at him, stunned. The trusteeship? If I helped her get full custody, if I helped her prove you were unfit? Mike wiped his nose on his sleeve, unable to look at me. She said she would make me the trustee of Abby's trust fund. I would control the assets until she turns 21. Why? I asked, though I was starting to guess. You have a job. You have a trust of your own. I lost it, Mike whispered. I lost it all. Online poker, DraftKings. I'm in debt, Maisie. $80,000. They're going to take my house. I needed the management fees from Abby's trust to cover the loans. The room spun. It wasn't about protecting the bloodline. It wasn't about my dangerous job. It was just greed. Pure, unadulterated greed. My mother-in-law wanted a trophy to polish, and my brother-in-law wanted a piggy bank to raid. They were willing to dismantle my life, traumatize my daughter, and erase my existence. All to cover a gambling debt. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt disgust. A deep, oily disgust that coated my insides. You sold us, I said quietly. You sold your niece for poker chips. Mike continued to weep, murmuring apologies that meant nothing. I walked over to the door and opened it wide. The night air rushed in, cool and clean, chasing away the scent of pepperoni and betrayal. Get out, I said. Maisie, please. Get out before I forget that I'm a mother, and remember that I'm a soldier, I warned him. And Mike? Tomorrow morning, you're going to do exactly what I tell you. Or I will take this recording device and this bank slip to the police, and you won't just lose your house, you'll lose your freedom. Mike scrambled out of the chair and ran out the door without looking back. I watched his taillights disappear into the darkness. The weak link had broken. And now, I had the weapon I need to take down the queen. The sheriff's office smelled of stale coffee and floor wax, a stark contrast to the scent of expensive French perfume that wafted in the moment the door opened. Margaret Louise Miller didn't walk into the room. She made an entrance. Dressed in a cream Chanel suit that probably cost more than my car, with a string of pearls resting against her throat, she looked every inch the grieving, concerned aristocrat. She was flanked by a lawyer known around Columbus as the Shark, a man whose billable hours could bankrupt a small business in a week. Margaret didn't look at me. To her, I was furniture. An obstacle to be removed, not a person to be acknowledged. She sat down opposite Sheriff Miller, no relation, and smoothed her skirt. Sheriff, she began, her voice crisp and cultured. I am here to file a formal complaint against my daughter-in-law. Last night, she threatened my son, Michael, in her home. She was violent and erratic. I want a restraining order filed immediately, and I demand that my private investigator, Mr. Hartman, be released. He was acting under my direct employ to ensure the safety of my grandchild. She flipped the script. In 3 sentences, she turned herself from the aggressor into the victim. I am just a worried grandmother, she continued, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. My granddaughter is living in squalor. That apartment, it smells of gunpowder and sweat. Her mother is absent, always training or deployed. Abby needs stability. She needs culture. She needs to be a Miller. She finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were cold, hard diamonds. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her diamond ring catching the fluorescent light. That woman, she spat the word, is destroying the Miller bloodline with her low-class upbringing. She's turning my granddaughter into a savage. I am prepared to pay any price to save that child. The room went silent. The lawyer smirked, ready to bury me in paperwork. But I didn't shrink. I stood up. I wasn't wearing my muddy fatigues today. I was wearing my Army service uniform, the Class A dress blues. My boots were polished to a mirror shine. My ribbons and medals, earned through blood and sacrifice in deserts thousands of miles away, sat straight on my chest. You talk about low class, Mrs. Miller. My voice rang out, filling the small office. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. Low class is hiring a stranger to stalk an 8-year-old girl in a public restroom, I said, stepping forward. Low class is using a checkbook to bribe a son to betray his own brother. You have money, Margaret. You have a mansion in Upper Arlington. But you are poor in character. You are morally bankrupt. Her lawyer started to stand up. Objection. This is... The sheriff held up a hand. He was a big man, an ex-Marine who had seen combat in Fallujah. He looked at the lawyer with eyes like flint. Sit down, counselor. The sergeant has the floor. I didn't look away from Margaret. You think you can buy Abby? I asked. You think you can purge me from her life like a stain? You forget one thing. Abby isn't just a Miller, she's a Barnes. And in my family, we don't fight with lawyers and lies. We fight with truth. I nodded to the sheriff. He pressed a button on his desk intercom. Send them in. The door opened and a Child Protective Services worker walked in, holding Abby's hand. Margaret's face lit up with a predatory joy. She stood up, arms wide. Abby, oh my darling, come to Grandma. Come here, sweetheart. Grandma's going to take you to the big house. Abby stopped. She looked at the woman in the cream suit, the woman who smelled of money and coldness. Then she looked at me, her mother, standing tall in uniform, the person who made her happy meals and tucked her in at night. Abby didn't run to Margaret. She took a step back. She released the social worker's hand and ran to my side, burying her face in the fabric of my dress blues. Margaret froze, her arms still open, embracing nothing but empty air. Abby, she faltered. Darling, it's Grandma. Abby turned her head, keeping one hand gripped tight on my uniform. She looked at the grandmother she barely knew. Grandma, Abby said, her voice small but clear, you made Uncle Mike cry, and you made Mommy sad. Margaret blinked, stunned. I was doing it for you, dear. No, Abby shook her head. I heard Uncle Mike. He said you promised him money. You wanted to send me away to a school where I can't see Mommy. The silence in the room was deafening. The truth, spoken by an 8-year-old, cut through the lies like a hot knife through butter. I don't want to be a Miller lady, Abby said, her voice trembling but firm. I want to stay with my Mommy. Margaret Miller stood there, mouth slightly open. For the first time in her life, her checkbook was useless. She couldn't buy this. She couldn't negotiate this. She had been defeated not by a legal strategy, but by the simple, uncorrupted love of a child. I put my hand on Abby's shoulder. We're done here, Sheriff. Margaret sank back into her chair, looking old and small. The Queen had fallen. This is Harper Vance, and wow, I have goosebumps. There is nothing more powerful than a child's truth, is there? It cuts through all the money, all the manipulation, and gets straight to the heart. Margaret thought she could buy a family, but she learned the hard way that love isn't for sale. If Abby's bravery just now made you cheer, or if you've ever seen the underdog win against a bully with money, show some love. Drop a heart emoji or type "Love wins" in the comments to celebrate this victory with Maisie and Abby. The gavel came down with a finality that echoed in my bones. Order granted, the judge said, signing the paperwork with a flourish. 5 years, 1,000 feet, no contact, direct or indirect. Just like that, the war was over. Margaret Miller was legally erased from our lives. As 2 deputies escorted her out of the courtroom, she didn't scream or make a scene. That would be beneath a Miller. Instead, she turned and looked at me one last time. Her eyes were no longer cold diamonds. They were the dull, flat eyes of a snake that had been defanged. There was hate there, yes, but mostly there was a terrifying impotence. She had lost. Mike stood in the back corner of the courtroom, staring at his shoes, unable to look at his mother or me. The great Miller dynasty, built on old money and arrogance, had been reduced to a pile of legal papers and shame. We drove home in silence. That night, the house was quiet. Too quiet. For weeks, I had lived with the paranoia of being watched. Now, there were no bugs behind the photos, no private investigators in the parking lot. But the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like a vacuum. I walked into the living room and started the purge. I grabbed a heavy-duty black garbage bag and went through the toy chest. I pulled out the expensive remote control car Mike had bought Abby for Christmas. Trash. I pulled out the designer doll Margaret had sent for her birthday, the one Abby was never allowed to play with because it was collectible. Trash. Every item was a lie, every gift was a bribe. I wanted them gone. I needed to scrub the DNA of their betrayal from the floorboards of my home. By the time I tied the bag shut and hauled it to the curb, I was sweating and shaking. I stood on the porch, looking at the suburban street under the streetlights. I had won. My daughter was safe. But why did I feel like I had just amputated a limb? Later, I was in the kitchen when I heard small footsteps. Abby was standing in the doorway, clutching her old, worn-out teddy bear, the one David had bought her the day she was born. "Mommy," she whispered, "I can't sleep." I abandoned the dishes in the sink and scooped her up, carrying her to the big armchair in the corner. She curled into my lap, burying her face in my neck. "Mommy," she mumbled against my skin. "Are Grandma and Uncle Mike bad people?" The question tore through me. How do you explain greed to an 8-year-old? How do you explain that her grandmother loves her reputation more than her grandchild? I stroked her hair, choosing my words carefully. "No, baby," I said softly. "They aren't monsters. They're just lost." Sometimes people let bad thoughts get inside their heads. They let greed and selfishness drive the bus. And when people are lost like that, they hurt the people around them without meaning to. "Like when I accidentally stepped on the cat's tail?" she asked. "A little bit," I lied gently. It was intentional, calculated cruelty, but she didn't need to know that yet. "We have to stay away from them right now so they don't hurt us again. We have to protect our happy." She nodded, accepting the logic, and soon her breathing deepened into sleep. I carried her to bed, tucked her in, and kissed her forehead. Then I went back to the living room. The house was empty. The victory was silent. I poured myself a glass of cheap Pinot Grigio, the kind with a screw top that Margaret would have turned her nose up at, and sat on the floor in front of the fireplace. I looked up at the mantelpiece. David's photo was still there, smiling down at me in his dress blues, the same photo I had shoved in Mike's face. "I'm sorry, David," I whispered to the empty room. The tears finally came, hot and fast. "I had to do it," I told his ghost. "I had to kick your mother out. I had to banish your brother. I broke your family, David. I smashed it into a million pieces." I took a sip of the wine. It tasted sour. "I promised to keep us together," I sobbed quietly. "But they made me choose. They made me choose between their pride and our daughter." The silence of the house pressed in on me. I was a staff sergeant. I was a warrior. I had won the battle. But sitting there on the floor, surrounded by the ghosts of a family that should have been, I realized the cost of the war. I had protected the castle. But now, I was the only one left inside the walls. 7 days passed. 7 days of quiet. 7 days of me staring at an empty driveway, wondering if peace was supposed to feel this lonely. On the 8th day, the sky over Columbus opened up. It was a relentless soaking rain that turned the gutters into rivers. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, when Abby pressed her nose against the front window. "Mommy," she said, her voice laced with worry, "Uncle Mike is getting wet." I walked over to the window. Through the blur of rain, I saw him. Mike was standing on the sidewalk across the street. He wasn't wearing a raincoat or carrying an umbrella. He was just standing there in a soaked hoodie, hands shoved deep into his pockets. looking at our house like it was a church he had been excommunicated from. He didn't step onto the property. He respected the invisible line I had drawn in the sand. He looked pathetic. He looked broken. "He's going to get sick," Abby whispered, looking up at me with those big, forgiving eyes. "Can we let him in?" I looked at my daughter. She didn't see a spy. She didn't see a traitor. She just saw her uncle standing in the rain. Children don't hold grudges. They hold hope. And looking at her, I felt the steel casing around my heart begin to crack. "Stay here, baby," I said. I grabbed my keys and went out to the mailbox first. I needed to know why he was here before I decided what to do. Inside the metal box, sitting atop a pile of junk mail, was a thick, damp envelope. No stamp. Mike had hand-delivered it. I opened it under the shelter of the porch. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a plea for money. It was a stack of legal documents. The first page was a notarized affidavit. Mike had voluntarily resigned as the potential trustee of Abby's trust fund. He had signed over all future management rights to a third-party fiduciary, a bank that neither he nor his mother could touch. He had legally cut off his own access to the money he had been so desperate to steal. Attached to the legal papers was a handwritten letter. The ink was slightly smeared from the humidity. "Maisie, I joined Gamblers Anonymous on Tuesday. I haven't placed a bet in 6 days. I told Mom to cut me off financially. I'm driving for DoorDash now to pay my own rent. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I am trying to become the brother David could look in the eye." I folded the letter. My hands were shaking. This wasn't a manipulation. A con man doesn't give away the keys to the vault. A con man doesn't stand in the rain for 2 hours without knocking. I grabbed the big golf umbrella from the stand and walked down the driveway. Mike saw me coming and straightened up, looking ready to run if I yelled. His hair was plastered to his skull, water dripping from his nose. He looked 10 years older than he had last week. I stopped at the edge of the curb. I didn't offer him the shelter of the umbrella. Not yet. "Go home, Mike," I said. He flinched, nodding quickly. "I know. I'm sorry. I just wanted to drop off the—" "Go home," I repeated, my voice firm but not angry. "Take a hot shower. Put on dry clothes." He turned to leave, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "And then," I added, "be back here tomorrow at 5 o'clock for dinner. Do not be late." Mike froze. He turned back slowly, squinting through the rain as if he hadn't heard me right. "Maisie," he choked out. You're giving me a chance?" I looked him dead in the eye. "This isn't a second chance, Mike. This is probation. You want to be Abby's uncle, you have to earn it, day by day, action by action. If you lie to me once, even a small lie, you are gone forever. Do you understand my orders?" He nodded vigorously, tears mixing with the rain on his face. Yes, I understand. Thank you, Maisie. Thank you." 5 o'clock, I said. "Don't make me wait." The next evening, at 4:55, the doorbell rang. Mike was wearing a clean shirt and freshly pressed khakis. He smelled like soap, not peppermint and smoke. In his hands, he held a small box of Lego, a $20 set, not the $100 monstrosities his mother used to send. "I bought it with my tips from last night," he said quietly as I let him in. Dinner was spaghetti and meatballs. It was simple, it was cheap, and it was the best meal we had eaten in months. The tension in the room was thick at first, but Abby broke it. She chattered endlessly about her school project, about the birds in the yard, about the Lego set Mike had brought. She pulled him onto the floor to help her build a spaceship. I sat on the sofa with a glass of tea, watching them. Mike laughed at something Abby said. It wasn't the nervous, placating laugh he used to have around his mother. It was a genuine, belly-deep laugh. He looked lighter. He looked like a man who had put down a heavy load he had been carrying for a lifetime. He wasn't David. He never would be. But watching him hand Abby a red brick with a smile, I realized that he didn't need to be David. He just needed to be Mike, the version of Mike that wasn't owned by anyone. Forgiveness didn't fix everything overnight. The scars were still there. But as the sun set outside, casting a warm glow over my living room, I knew I had made the right call. I hadn't just saved my daughter from a predator, I had saved a drowning man from himself. The bridge was rebuilt. It was fragile, but it was there. And for now, that was enough. 6 months later, the Ohio winter finally broke, and spring arrived with a burst of green that seemed to wash the world clean. We didn't stay in the old apartment. Too many ghosts, too many shadows in the corners where listening devices used to hide. I sold it and used the money to put a down payment on a small ranch-style house closer to the base. It wasn't a mansion in Upper Arlington. It didn't have marble floors or crystal chandeliers, but it had a big backyard with an oak tree perfect for climbing and a front porch that caught the morning sun. Most importantly, my neighbors were military families, people who hung Blue Star flags in their windows, people who understood that when I was late picking up Abby because of a drill, it wasn't neglect, it was duty. On the day we moved in, I hung a simple wooden sign on the front door. It read, "Home of the free because of the brave." It was a declaration. This was our territory now. Mike came over every Saturday. He had kept his word. He was 6 months sober from gambling, working at a local woodworking shop. His hands, once soft and nervous, were now rough with calluses and stained with varnish. He looked healthier, his skin tanned from working outdoors. One Saturday afternoon, I stood at the kitchen window, watching them in the backyard. Mike was teaching Abby how to field a ground ball for her Little League tryouts. "Keep your glove down, Abs," he called out, tossing the ball gently. "Watch it all the way into the leather." Abby scooped up the ball and fired it back, laughing. Mike high-fived her, his face splitting into a wide grin. Then he knelt down to tie her sneaker, his movements patient and gentle. For a second, my breath caught in my throat. The way his shoulders set, the way he tilted his head. It was so much like David. He wasn't trying to replace his brother. He was honoring him. He was being the uncle David would have wanted him to be, present, sober, and kind. He wasn't bringing expensive gifts anymore. The currency of our new life was time. And unlike his mother's money, time was something real. Speaking of Margaret, news traveled fast in a town like Columbus. I heard from a friend who catered events in Upper Arlington that the Miller Mansion had become a mausoleum. After the restraining order and the public embarrassment of the court case, Margaret had been quietly excommunicated from her high society circle. The charity boards didn't want the scandal. The country club ladies didn't want the drama. She went through 3 housekeepers in 4 months because no one could stand her bitterness. She sat alone in her 10-bedroom house, surrounded by her antiques and her pride, with no one to share Sunday dinner. She had all the money in the world, but she was serving a life sentence in a prison of her own making. Karma, I discovered, didn't always need a helping hand. Sometimes it just needed time. A few weeks later, I stood in the gymnasium of the local elementary school. It was the Girl Scouts bridging ceremony. The room was packed with parents, cameras flashing, kids running around in their vests and sashes. I stood near the front, wearing my Army service uniform. I wanted Abby to see me. I wanted her to know that the uniform wasn't something that took me away from her. It was something that made me strong for her. "Troop 412, the troop leader announced. Abby marched out in a line with the other girls. She was wearing her brown vest, covered in colorful patches she had earned over the last few months. Camping, first aid, citizenship. She stood tall, her chin up, her eyes scanning the crowd until she found me. When she saw me, she didn't wave wildly like she used to. She stood a little straighter. She gave me a small, confident nod. This wasn't the terrified little girl shivering in a bathroom stall, afraid of a stranger's shoes. This was a survivor. She had faced fear, she had faced betrayal, and she had come out the other side with her spirit intact. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. Next to me, Mike was holding up his phone, recording the whole thing. He sniffled, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "She looks great, doesn't she?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Yeah, Mike," I whispered back, putting a hand on his shoulder. "She looks like a soldier." We had survived the winter. The frost had melted. And watching my daughter recite the Girl Scout promise, her voice clear and strong, I knew that our spring had finally come. We were deployed to a new mission now. Happiness. and this was one mission I intended to complete. Attention to orders. The command echoed through the cavernous auditorium of the base, bouncing off the polished wood walls. 300 soldiers snapped to attention in unison, the sound of their boots striking the floor like a single thunderclap. I stood center stage, my back ramrod straight, staring fixedly at the American flag standing guard in the corner. My heart wasn't pounding with fear today. It was beating with a steady, powerful rhythm. The Secretary of the Army has reposed special trust and confidence in the patriotism, valor, fidelity, and professional excellence of Sergeant First Class Maisie Barnes. 1 year. It had been exactly 1 year since I stood in a bathroom stall, trembling with a silent weapon in my hand. 1 year since my own family tried to dismantle my life. Today, the colonel stepped forward, holding a velvet cushion. On it sat a new pair of chevrons. 3 chevrons up, 3 rockers down, with a wreath in the center. Master Sergeant, E8. As the colonel pinned the new rank onto the epaulettes of my dress blues, I felt the weight of it. It wasn't just a piece of cloth, it was a validation. It was the Army telling me that I had walked through the fire and come out forged in steel. I looked down at the front row. There were no empty seats today. There was no judgmental matriarch in a Chanel suit sneering at my uniform. There was just Mike, wearing a clean button-down shirt, holding his phone up to record, grinning like he had won the lottery. And next to him was Abby. She was bouncing in her seat, clutching a small bouquet of grocery store carnations, her face radiating pure, unadulterated pride. The colonel stepped back and saluted. I returned it, cutting the air with precision. Then I turned to the podium. I wasn't required to make a speech. But I had something to say. I looked out at the sea of faces, young privates, seasoned officers, and especially the young female soldiers sitting in the back, looking tired and uncertain. They told me, I began, my voice clear and amplified, that the Army is no place for a mother. They told me that you cannot serve your country and raise a child at the same time. They said that loving my daughter made me weak, and serving my country made me a bad parent. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. I stand here today as a master sergeant to tell you that they were wrong. We do not fight in foreign deserts because we love war. We fight because we love what we left behind. We carry rifles so our children can carry lunchboxes. We stand guard in the dark so they can sleep in the light. My love for my daughter didn't distract me. It sharpened me. It gave me something worth dying for, and more importantly, something worth living for. I looked directly at Abby. Discipline is freedom, I said. And love? Love is the ultimate protection. The applause didn't start as a ripple, it exploded. It roared through the hall. I saw a young female corporal in the third row wiping tears from her eyes. I had given them permission to be both warriors and nurturers. 30 minutes later, the ceremony was over. The crowd had dispersed, leaving only the quiet hum of the empty hall. Abby ran up the steps of the stage and launched herself at me. I caught her, groaning theatrically as I lifted her up. She was getting so big. "You looked like a superhero, Mom," she squealed. She reached up and grabbed my patrol cap from the podium. She placed it on her own head. It was far too big, sliding down over her ears and covering her eyes. She giggled, pushing it back up. "When I grow up," she said, her voice suddenly serious, "I want to be just like you." I smiled, reaching out to adjust the brim of the hat so she could see. "No, Abby," I said softly. "Don't be like me." She looked confused. "I want you to be better than me," I told her. "I want you to be stronger, smarter, kinder. I don't have $1 million to leave you. I don't have a trust fund or a mansion to give you. But I can give you this." I tapped the brim of the hat. "I give you your courage. I give you your self-respect. Those are things that no one can ever tax, no one can ever steal, and no one can ever buy." Abby grinned, saluting me with a sloppy, adorable hand. "Yes, ma'am." We walked out of the auditorium and into the late afternoon sun. The Ohio sky was painting itself in brilliant shades of purple and gold. We piled into the car. Mike took the driver's seat, a role he had earned, not one he was forced into. He started the engine, humming a tune along with the radio. "Pizza tonight?" he asked, looking in the rearview mirror. "Pizza tonight," I agreed. As we drove away from the base, heading toward our small ranch house with the big oak tree, I rolled down the window. The cool air rushed in, smelling of spring and freedom. I looked in the side mirror. The American flag was flying high above the parade deck, snapping proudly in the wind. Behind it, the sun was setting, closing the book on the hardest year of my life. I took a deep breath. I wasn't just a widow anymore. I wasn't just a victim of a wealthy bully. I was Maisie Barnes. I was a mother. I was a warrior. And as I listened to my daughter singing in the back seat and my brother-in-law laughing at a joke on the radio, I knew the truth. I had defended my country. But more importantly, I had defended my home. And the fortress was safe. Maisie's journey teaches us a profound truth about the definition of strength. We often think strength is about how much we can endure in silence, or how high we can build our walls. But real strength is knowing when to fight, but also knowing when to forgive. It is the courage to cut out the toxic roots in our lives, even if they share our last name, and the bravery to plant new seeds of trust like Maisie did with Mike. Family isn't just DNA, it's behavior. Protect your peace, defend your boundaries, and never apologize for doing what is best for your children. This brings us to the end of Behind the Restroom Door. I know this story was heavy, but look at where we landed, in a place of hope. If Maisie's resilience inspired you today, or if you believe that every child deserves a fierce protector like her, please take a moment to support this channel. Hit that like button to help us share more stories of courage. Subscribe so you never miss a journey. And in the comments below, type warrior if you believe in fighting for your family. Until next time, stay safe and keep fighting the good fight.